Welcome to the First Time Facilitator podcast. Whether you're a first-time facilitator or a seasoned pro, listen in for tips and tricks to make a bigger impact at the next workshop you deliver. And now, your host. She drives a blue Toyota, Leanne Hughes.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Leanne Hughes, and I'm here to help you develop and deliver workshops that kill. Do you want to hear a very cool way of getting people to laugh the first few minutes they enter your workshop? Well, stay tuned. We have an excellent hack for you. And I've got to say, I'm in such a lucky position to be able to get this excuse every week of hopping onto Skype or grabbing a coffee with some just amazing people and talking about facilitation and what they do. And it's funny because when we talk about relationships, a kind of unfortunate thing about human nature is that we seem to like the people that remind us of ourselves. And that's how I felt talking to today's guest, Lily Gros. Her last name is spelt Gros because it's French. Yep, she's the first French facilitator we've had on the show. Like me, she's also recently left her job to pursue a full-time role as a solopreneur in the world of facilitation, and she started up Minute Facilitation. I know she's going to be incredibly successful after only spending a brief amount of time on this conversation, talking about her approach to all things facilitation, as well as her approach to life. You can tell she's very positive and upbeat. Lily's passion is to enable you to detect your potential, nourish and activate it. She likes creating events that allow you to discover your potential, whether you work in corporate, whether you're young, whether you're retraining, from all walks of life. And she also helps newbie facilitators across 3 areas of facilitation. Lily explains what those 3 areas are and what they mean later in the episode. Now, onto something a little bit different. I am looking for some ideas. I would like to put together a workbook on some wonderful games that you can play in a workshop or in a meeting using dice. That's right, dice, D-I-C-E. How have you used dice before in a workshop or a meeting? So have you played a simple game or played something more complex? Have you played something on a camping trip, road trip that could be applicable here? I know it's a bit random. It'll make sense later. But I want to hear from you and what games that you've played. So hop onto firsttimefacilitator.com to share your game. So like I said, I'll be putting together a workbook with all of these games put together along with my ideas. And you'll be acknowledged in that workbook, even if your game isn't featured or selected. If your game is selected though, you'll be receiving a very cool First Time Facilitator trinket. So I'll be promoting this competition/contribution special till mid-June 2019. So hop onto the website and I would love to hear what games you've had to play. If you'd like to continue the conversation when the show is over, join our free Facebook group called The Flip Chart. It'd be great to chat to you in there. And as always, you can find show notes for this episode and view all the awesome work that Lily is doing at firsttimefacilitator.com/episode 64. Now, onto the show. I would like to welcome to the First Time Facilitator podcast, Lily Gros. She's dialing in all the way from France and it's super early for her. So appreciate you coming on to the call so early, Lily.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Lily, I'd love for you to share with our listeners a bit about you and how you sort of wound up in the role of facilitation and share with them what you're doing now.
Yeah. So I'm a full-time facilitator. I started in my career working with students in an NGO and accompanying them in their social ventures. And now I do full-time facilitation for clients that want to make great workshops and want to have engaging days. So train newbie facilitators that would love to organize workshops but have no idea of how to do that. And also I love creating experiences myself. So not just facilitating for others, but creating events about optimism, audacity, laughter, and, all these kind of things that make our heart pop.
Wow, that's really strong. I like that tagline, your heart pop. Where did you sort of decide that this was the career that you wanted to pursue?
I think it came gradually. I always had some sort of facilitation in my previous jobs. So I did workshops, seminars from maybe 5 to 300 students, and it really came gradually as time passed. I had less and less fundraising, management, and I had more and more facilitating. And at some point, I just realized that was the part I loved the most in all of the functions I could have in my job.
We sound very similar because I had a similar career progression. I was doing sort of other work and then slowly started really looking forward to most of the workshops and the live events where I felt, it could have a lot of impact. You mentioned that you like running events that make your heart pop. And I know that on your website, you have a tagline, which is wonderful. It's the facilitator of laughter, daring, and happiness. What draws you to those few things?
Laughter was a funny start. For no reason particularly, I joined a class that trained me to do laughter yoga. Have you ever heard of laughter yoga?
All I know about it is you go to a park and you just start laughing for about 30 minutes. Am I on the right track?
Yeah.
I've always wanted to do it.
So it's just a method to make people laugh in a very short amount of time and have you do those breathing exercises and clapping exercises that gets your brain and heart filled with a lot of good things. And I started doing some sessions, some events about laughter yoga, and actually just trying to keep that spirit into any workshop and try to get people to laugh or smile as quickly as they can. You know, when you have positive emotions, you collaborate much faster and you learn a lot deeper. To have that in a lot of my workshops. Daring, first I love the book of Brené Brown, Dare to Lead. If you haven't read it yet, I really do recommend it. But just to get people on a path where they actually dare to be themselves and to say the things that they really have in mind. You know, not workshops where they just shut up and listen and say what they are expected to say, but where they actually dare to make a statement. And happiness, just to put people in a place where they feel good and where they are valued and where they feel that they can contribute and add something to the meetings.
Fantastic. It's a really sweet combination of three things. I've got to ask, do you have any tips for our audience if they want to bring in this laughter and the happiness that you talk about very quickly into their workshops? What kind of techniques or what do you use to do that?
There's actually an exercise that I learned in my previous jobs that I really like. It's a portrait exercise. So basically you give out 3 little pieces of paper to each participant, and then you have them face one another, so in pairs, and they have 30 seconds to draw out the other person's face without looking at the paper. So it makes portraits that are absolutely hideous, but people start laughing right away because they're just looking at each other and acknowledging the fact that they will do very ugly things, and it just gets them laughing really quick.
That's awesome. I'm laughing just thinking about that, how that would play out, especially because it doesn't matter if you are even talented in art because you can't look down at your piece of paper anyway. So everyone's sort of drawing blind.
Yep.
So then the skill, everyone's sort of on an equal platform there in terms of their artistic ability. It's a clever one. So you also mentioned that you train newbie facilitators. So what kind of process do you take newbie facilitators through when you said that they've never been exposed to being in front of and leading workshops and this is all really new to them and they step in and meet you? What kind of things do you tell them?
Well, first I help them realize that they already have a lot of skills. Even if you haven't animated a proper workshop, generally people already have some skills. For some of them, it will be how to design a workshop, or some of them, they will have a very good human contact. So, I think the first step that I take them through is just doing a diagnosis. Where do you feel comfortable? Where don't you feel comfortable? And then working on the set of skills that they don't feel comfortable with. Usually I divide it into 3 sections. Design, methods, like how does it run through during the workshops and what methods can you use to make the process smooth, and one that is more on the posture. You as a facilitator, what posture do you use? How do you adapt to your audience and how do you grow in time?
Do you find that, I know this is probably a big generalization, but do people is it pretty spread across the 3 that people struggle with? Or is it mainly design that most people struggle with, or has everyone sort of come in? What have you noticed in terms of trends with the audience that you work with?
I don't think it's very representative, but for now, what I've seen is that people tend to dive in really through the methods. And what they really ask me first is, what tool can I use? What can it look like? And actually have not trouble, but it does take a bit of time for them to realize that they have to take a step back and to really ask themselves a lot of questions before they dive into methods. So I would say designing is the part that they are least not comfortable, but maybe least used to.
Yeah, I think you're right. And what I've heard from previous guests on the show as well, that what they've seen, especially from people that are technically really good at stuff, is like their technical brilliance is what they're comfortable with. So when it comes to design, they just think it's about just pouring all the information down on a PowerPoint or a handout and not really thinking about what does the audience know, what do they need. Exactly.
And there's another question that they always ask me is, how do you deal with the grumpy participants?
What do you say to that?
The first thing I ask them is to take a step back and wonder why people are grumpy. Because if someone is grumpy because they're tired or because they are bored or because they haven't had a chance to express on the issue, I don't think you will deal with it the same way. How do you do it?
Yeah, when I guess in the moment, it's really about, I do have to pause. I think that's the right thing, is taking a step back and thinking what's going on here. And sometimes it's quite surprising because a person might have, I guess there's a few experiences I'm thinking about at the moment. They've engaged for quite a bit of the content and then it gets onto a certain topic and that's when they disengage. So you can kind of think, all right, maybe it's not the person and their environment, it's actually the content they don't like. Or something about this is confronting for them. And so then you need to start exploring that using questions. And yeah, there's a whole concept called tribes, which is quite interesting. And even just classroom management, which kind of reminds me of school. But even if you get sort of a couple people that are talkative in a room and just while you're explaining something, just sort of walking towards them, not even acknowledging them, but you find that they will quieten. So there's little tools and techniques like that, which are quite useful that I think. And before I knew that, I was like, oh, do I have to just stop and tell them to be quiet? Or like the way that in terms of using your nonverbals is very powerful as well.
I totally agree that techniques work so well. And you can even add a little smile and then that will end it.
Yeah, we're very similar because I tend to smile an awful lot as well. But that's just, I think, have you done the Clifton Strengths tool at all?
No, but I will look at it. Thank you.
Yeah. Because a few people I talked to on the podcast that sent, or just in general, we all seem to have positivity as one of our top 5 strengths. And that's kind of leaning towards a talent that you just naturally always smile when you see someone new. And yeah, it's just natural to me to do that. So that's my default. But every facilitator has their own little, I guess, tool of working with it. Have you ever had any situations and workshops that haven't gone so well that you've had to navigate?
Yeah, I had one workshop last year that wasn't very easy for me. It was a workshop where I hadn't had a real chance to design with the client. So the client was very busy and sent interns with me who didn't have at all the background of what the meeting was set for and didn't have the depth that I needed. So I did kind of a design, but not really having a chance to step back. I had 2 hours of road. I had to pick up a co-animator, so I arrived and the meeting had already started. So I really came just for my workshop, but normally I really don't do that. I come for the whole day and I see what is going on and I really take a chance to commit and engage with people. But here I just arrived and started doing the workshop and didn't sound right. It worked, but it didn't sound quite right. And I was tired and I was thinking of the workshop that I was doing the day after. It had been a long week. I wasn't present. This was kind of a breaking point for me. I just set out, and this is actually one of the moments where I decided I had to go on full-time facilitating and stop doing all of these jobs at once. And yeah, it was a big time realization for me to see myself not present in a workshop and just saying to myself, this is not how I want to facilitate. And I think that the client felt it, and she had actually seen me animate one of my best workshops, and she saw me do the worst.
I wouldn't say it was the worst, but in terms of you weren't present, were you just sort of distracted and thinking ahead and not really, was it more of a distracted kind of sense that you had?
Yeah, I was distracted. I was not fully there. Like my mind was thinking of the workshop of the day after, of all the week that had been behind, of all the projects that I was managing in the moment. My brain was going cuckoo.
Actually, it's funny because I've recently, I might be doing some work with a client and it's going to be a very heavy schedule. So Monday to Friday, full days. So 5 days in a row.
Wow.
Long days. Yeah, that was my reaction too. And I've part of this this business group, and I was asking people, and I'm actually should post this on the flip chart too. But what are your strategies for navigating the 5 days? I think it's going to be tough. And then one guy wrote back and he said, "Why do you think it's going to be tough? Who says so?" That was like, yeah, you're so right. Like I'm already thinking this is going to be hard, and I think I'm going in with that mindset, so it will be. But I think it's more about taking every day, being in the moment, being present, obviously taking care of myself. But I think that mindset shift was very important. It was a very good call from that guy.
Totally. And when you engage in a certain mindset, people will follow you on that mindset, whatever it is. If you're positive, they will be positive. If you're grumpy, they will be grumpy. I think the link between the person who facilitates and the audience is so strong. If you're really connected to your audience, it really changes things, what mindset you're starting with. I totally agree with what you're saying.
And on that note of what we find is similar in terms of energy, it'd be interesting to talk about cultural differences, particularly because you're the first French facilitator we've had on the show. So welcome. And so I've spoken to a few facilitators, mainly Australia, UK and the USA. I've had a guy from Belgium on before.
Okay.
What have you noticed? Do you think there are differences between the French audience? Have you facilitated in other countries as well? Or have you sort of just been listening to what's available, like on podcasts, on videos, and seeing what international audiences are like?
I haven't had a chance to facilitate in other countries, but this is something I would like to do very much. Yeah, I more get the view by reading books and listening to podcasts. Also, one thing that I'm wondering about is decision making and debating, because in France we love to debate, and, and we love it. When we have a decision that everyone has had their chance to express their feeling, to express how they think about the decision, and to really debate the pros and cons of everything. I'm really making the stereotype, but
yeah.
Decisions can take a lot of time in a French culture. How does that happen in Australia?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I'm going to hopefully not stereotype, but I've worked in many different industries and organizations. When it comes to, you said that everyone likes to get involved and battle the decision. That's probably not the case in Australia. I think you'd find possibly through status, maybe it's the loudest person, the person at the top of the hierarchy. It's kind of up to them to be in a meeting and say, so what do you think? It seems to be sometimes a fear, and there's a lot of work in Australia at the moment about, we've talked through diversity and the importance of having diverse teams, but now the conversation is shifting to that inclusive leadership, because if you get all the ideas and opinions from people in the room, you get more of an informed decision. There's also, and you're probably facing this in France as well, just a lot of time pressure to make decisions. So
yes.
I guess, and people think, well, I'm in this position, I'm getting paid to make the big decisions. But sometimes you find that in that middle manager layer that they don't make decisions because they're this whole fear, and things just get caught in limbo, which is really fascinating because things kind of stagnate, but then you're like, well, what's progressing? And it can get frustrating. So I think the good managers are the ones that appreciate, and they will go and consult, possibly individually outside. So then when you get to a meeting, everyone's been consulted and it's just making the decision. I think that people don't really have time to have that broad discussion and really nut it out all together. But anyone listening, you might argue that, but that's been my opinion and my story from what I've observed. Yeah, I'd love to be in a French meeting and see how flamboyant it is and everyone getting quite heated.
I think it really depends also on, this is the broad stereotype, but after it really changes if you're in a political meeting, in a social meeting, in a big corporation meeting also. And I find that in big companies, especially if they're international ones, you can have the what you were saying about the power of hierarchy. The more you have status, the more you have the right to speak. We also have that in France, depending on where you're animating the workshop. One of the most interesting workshop I animated was a workshop where we had politicians, people that work in culture, for social ventures, for a lot of diverse companies and different backgrounds, and where they could really engage on different points of view and, not have everyone go in the same direction, but actually have a real debate. And that was very interesting.
And did you facilitate that discussion?
Well, I facilitated the facilitators. It was in had been a monastery. So you had lots of different rooms. I think you had 5 rooms, so 5 facilitators. And I would do the link between the facilitators to ensure that they were on the same board and on the same time constraints. So I didn't facilitate directly the discussions, but I still got a good view of them.
Wow, that's really great. Like you leading the consistency and making sure that that's being followed through. That's awesome. And you've heard of the phrase, the psychological safety of a team. Yeah, so it's really about how safe do team members feel in speaking up. And it's true, the leader needs to start encouraging that, and there's things that they can do to enable that. I've also been working in, I've done some work in Asia as well, and completely different. So it's very hierarchy driven, very, very hierarchy. Even though there's like incredibly smart people at all levels, I don't know if I could live in that environment. I definitely speak up. So how many different languages do you speak? You speak English, French. I noticed there's a few others as well, right?
I can understand and speak Spanish, but basic Spanish. I cannot facilitate in Spanish, definitely, but I can listen. I think I would understand if I would be more in the audience. If I work on my Italian in maybe 6 months, I could do something, I think. And I have a very basic understanding of Swedish in the maybe 2 or 3 first phrases you can have in conversation with someone.
Fantastic. So there'll definitely be opportunities for you, I imagine, to facilitate internationally. How long have you had your own business for?
A month and 2 weeks.
Oh my gosh, we are exactly the same.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, me too. I know we spoke about what you wanted to sort of niche down on in the beginning, but because I'm still sort of working on what I really want to focus on, and every day you ask me and it kind of shifts. So, but the thing I like about the 3 things that you really talk about is that you can apply them to different situations. You can apply that to leadership and teams and conflict and all of that. Okay, so how are you going with all of in terms of marketing your business and getting the word out? How's that traveling for you a month in?
Pretty well. What was quite great is that I had already started doing free missions on the side when I had my job. So I actually had clients when I launched into my own venture. So that was pretty great. And now I can actually make a living out of what I do, which is just amazing.
Yay. That's really wonderful. Congrats.
Yeah, I really love that. Thank you. I actually love to just network and have things out by word of mouth. And what I try to do is, I think like you, is to provide people with content. I don't do podcasts, but I rather do videos. So it's much shorter videos of maybe 5-6 minutes where I start to introduce notions of facilitation and have people think about what facilitation is, and with sometimes more broad remarks or broad thinking and sometimes very focused thinking. For example, the video of last week was how do you deal with difficult participants? And I write a weekly newsletter with tools and tricks about facilitation. And I have had some good feedback in the last weeks, and actually some people who engage their teams on the newsletter because it gives them tricks and tips to advance. So I'm pretty grateful for that.
Great job. The commitment to do a weekly newsletter and to do video as well, it's pretty huge. So if people want to sign up to that newsletter, we'll put that link in the show notes for them. That will work really well.
It's a French newsletter for now.
Okay. How? Because Google Translate can be a bit iffy. I've used Google Translate a few times and you kind of get the message, but we'll still put it up there in case we do have any French listeners. You never know with podcasting. Okay, so you mentioned Brené Brown's book, Dare to Lead, and you've got your video sequence that you bring out as well with sort of how-to guides. What other resources have been useful to you when you've been developing your craft as a facilitator?
One of the most useful thing is just watching other facilitators facilitate. Getting on board at meetings where I'm not the lead facilitator, but where there's someone else that is lead facilitator is one of the things that makes me grow the most. A month ago, I was facilitating a meeting where there was an amazing lead facilitator that did some sketch notes before the meeting to have the overview of what was going in the meeting. So, instead of having an Excel spreadsheet of all of the things, well, we had that also. She had this amazing drawing of the different phases of the day. And that is something that I didn't learn in books. I just learned it by engaging with another facilitator. And one of the resources I discovered, well, it's actually, I think the book was published not so long ago, was The Art of Gathering. And this book just blew my mind about how you can facilitate everywhere. This is not in the French culture to facilitate dinners and have some themed cocktails and things weird. When we get into social gatherings, it's more organic. So it's very interesting to see a more American culture of how you can facilitate everyday gatherings. This book is just amazing if you want to take a step back about facilitation and really ask yourself why you're doing that meeting and not just doing it for the sake of another meeting.
Oh, I love that book. And even just, I'm rereading it, but even up to the point again where she talks about how different groups set up these really explicit rules for their gathering. And I thought that was really quite interesting. And, how could you bring that in? Because it creates then that culture of like, okay, we're going to come here and these are the rules we're going to live by. And because I don't really like rules, but then I was like, oh no, that does work. It really does. It's an amazing book. What's the best advice that you could offer to someone that's starting out their journey as a facilitator? Would it be to do the things that you do, like so maybe co-facilitate with you or grab the art of gathering? What suggestions do you have?
I would really suggest the first one would be to just shadow someone who facilitates and follow them and see how they work and do that with several people. So I think facilitation is something that you have to this is my personal approach, but it's not something that you discover in books. You can do that to deepen your knowledge, but if you want to discover it for the first time, you just have to see how it works. You have to see the group dynamics, you have to see the personal dynamics, the logistics. You have to just live it first and to see how other people might do it in other styles than what you could do it also.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, I don't know about you, but I know my style is really based around, the 5 to 10 amazing facilitators that I love. And I've just picked out different attributes of things that they're doing and brought it all in together. So when you spoke about that lady who was using the sketch notes, I did notice on your Instagram that you'd actually done a few sketches as well. So they looked really impressive.
Thank you. I try to not be a perfectionist about them. I'm just trying and doing them.
Good on you. Good job. How do you prepare then for like an upcoming workshop? Say it's like, 4 weeks out to even the night before. What are some things that you do?
When I design, I tend to have a first meeting with the client, where I ask them a lot of questions. And then when I design, I usually do it in 2 or 3 times, have a first draft where I set the intention, brainstorm, really set out the objectives, the reason why we do the meeting, and then leave it rest for a week if I can, or a day or 2, not just cramming it, all the design in one intense thinking session, but having it in 2 or 3 times if I can. That really helps me get the best of my creativity and not just doing a hard work session that ends up with something very mental.
Yeah, it's really hard to be creative when you're under time constraints and you need to push something. You need to keep pushing it. I love that approach of waiting a week, because sometimes you might be doing something completely random or different outside of the workshop, and then it's like, we could use that. Like you might be playing tennis and think, I can bring that into the workshop. It's great. It's good that you give yourself that time. How about the night before?
Try to get as much sleep as I can. I'm not very good at that. I tend to not sleep very well before workshops, but maybe a bit of meditation. If I feel I'm really going to have some trouble sleeping, do a bit of meditation, have a meal I like. Well, actually do something that I enjoy. I usually don't see the details of the logistics the night before. I might get back to them in the morning just before, to have a refresher, but I don't usually do it the day before, except if I'm facilitating with other people.
Mm-hmm. So you trust that you've planned?
Yeah. And in the morning, just having some music arrive really in advance and, just making the room I feel comfortable in and where I can really welcome people with a warm atmosphere and not just a boring gray plain room.
Oh, yeah, cool. So how do you jazz your room up?
Well, just setting tables a bit differently. I try to change the settings as things were before, especially if it's in a meeting room in a company. I just try to change everything so that people, when they arrive, they have this surprise of, the meeting room is not the same as before. Maybe it means I have to change my posture and open my mind. Yeah, so I try to do that and have some colored pens, some Post-its, some material that might excite them and make them see that it's going to be participative, and some music. I like putting salsa in the morning.
Oh, salsa. I can see that working. It does get your feet moving, that's for sure.
Yep.
I think the physical environment is so underrated. You can do the best content, but if you can actually just mix it up and where things are, like you said, they walk in and it just completely shifts the expectation. So I love that. Do you have a favorite go-to icebreaker, energizer activity? You did mention one at the beginning of the show with your portraits. Is there anything else that you like to, some questions you like to throw out to your participants?
Oh, one question I really like is tell me about 3 things that make you grateful. I like that one. I like to ask people about their dreams. It's not always appropriate if you have an audience that's really cold or not engaged yet. Maybe that's not the first question I would have. But having people talk about something that really excites them personally, ask them why they've come. Yeah, I like those. And I like what I like to do is have a time where they can really say hello to each other, whether it be, in discussions in duos, or have them actually stand up and walk through the room. And when I clap my hands, they stop and they pause and they really say hello to the person that's next to them. Just not hello, shaking hand, how are you? And you don't even listen to the answer, but really, hello, I acknowledge you're here. I really thank you for being here. And I don't always do that, but with big groups, I think it can really help creating this connection atmosphere.
Yeah, I really like that because it combines like the physical movement. But that's really interesting. Yeah, rather than a superficial welcome, it's actually, no, we want you to, this is how we're going to run this workshop. We're going to really listen to each other.
Mm-mm-mm.
It's fantastic. And so finally, if our listeners want to connect with you and find out what you're up to and watch some of your videos, even though they, may not know French just yet,
Yeah.
Where can we send them?
Well, you've got my website, lilygros.co, and then I'm pretty active on Instagram and LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is the place where I am most likely to share some contents in English. Yeah, and I've got my weekly newsletter that is in French for now. I might do some contents in English in the year to come, but for now I'm for French speakers and very keen to engage in English more personally.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, that's great. Well, congratulations. It's great to know that you're sort of on this journey along with me in the same time frame. It'd be good to keep checking in on each other and see how we're both going.
Definitely.
I think in this space. So maybe a follow-up episode in a year and see how far we've both come would be wonderful. But congratulations on all that you do and all your videos. And like you said, you are very active on Instagram too. And it's been great connecting with you and knowing there's people out that are really passionate about creating these amazing workshop experiences for people. I think we've got a very similar purpose. So it's wonderful connecting with you and all the best for your business and beyond.
Thank you, and the very same to you. May your heart pop along the journey.
Yeah, I think I might write that down on my whiteboard behind me. It's a really great philosophy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lily.
Thanks a lot.
Hey, thanks so much for sticking around. You've reached the end of another episode of the First Time Facilitator podcast. Connect with the show at firsttimefacilitator.com or follow me on Instagram at Leanne Hughes to find out what I'm up to during the week. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to share it with someone who will also appreciate the insight, and make it easier for yourself and subscribe to the show in your podcast player of choice. Thank you so much for listening, and chat to you next week.